What does identity mean to you?
Identity is something very fundamental to our being, our very essence. Um, and my own understanding of identity, I think I would categorize it, into three dimensions. One being um, the spiritual aspect, one being the physiological aspect, but one also perhaps being an intellectual dimension. And I think these three um, shape us or give us a sense of who we are. In that sense, take for instance a child, right from birth. You know, what shapes these three dimensions for them? How are they raised by their families? How are they raised by society in general? How are they socialized to be the human being, the adults that they become? But also, I have to quickly put a caveat to that very point, which is actually this idea of seeing children as subhuman who then become human when they become adults. So in other words, it's important to realize that while children are children at that point, before they become adults, or we have to realize that they have an identity themselves, which needs to be nurtured, which needs to be to be respected as well. So in a sense, this kind of ties in with some of the work that I've been very, I think, blessed to do, working with children over the years, particularly in schools, using storytelling, using poetry, um, particularly to help children of ethnic minority identities, but also helping others who are not from ethnic minority identities to understand that we are as human beings, as society, we are so diverse, right? Um, and if you take the intellectual dimension, I think it's very important that children grow up um, being given a sense of worth, a sense of confidence that they can engage with issues. They can themselves grapple with some of these things that they are, challenges that they face, concepts that they may encounter in life. So as adults, I think we're not trying to kind of model children to be what we want them to be entirely, but it's giving them the tools to be able to develop intellectually, to develop spiritually, as well as to develop physiologically. So this speaks to kind of one's needs, right? It's not their needs are not just physical needs only. Um, which is why I think it's very important to pay attention to what kind of education we're giving our children, but what kind of affirmation as well are we giving them? Are we do we communicate that we actually love them? Do we communicate to them that they are important? Do we take time to affirm them, to help them develop that their own sense of identity? And this is kind of linked to some research I've done, as part of my studies, looking at this concept which are called power on behalf of. Put simply, is this idea that as adults we exercise a form of power for that enables children to develop their own power in a sense, or their own kind of capabilities. So in exercising that power, we have to realize that there's a sense of responsibility, because when that power is abused, it can actually be detrimental to children's development, of a sense of self, a sense of worth. So I think it's a very complex, this issue of identity is very complex. But to put it very simply, I think I could sum it up with this word of worth. What sense of worth does one generate intrinsically, internally, as well as externally in their relationships with others? Uh, Hopefully, that kind of gives a sense of my view of identity.
Can you make it more personal?
To make it more personal, I think for me, I guess as a poet, uh, even to be able to share my poetry, I'm sharing a part of myself. I'm sharing a part of my identity. That takes a degree of vulnerability. You know, Sometimes I have to really tap into my own experiences, but also sometimes I have to also tap into other people's experiences and relate with them. Um, you know, I have to be honest about my own struggles. in my engagement with the public, be honest enough to say, look, I've gone through battles that others have gone through. So in that sense, there's nothing unique about me. But in a sense, I think these platforms like poetry, storytelling, or even academics are they are platforms which enable me to connect with others, which enable me to relate, and perhaps allow other people to relate with me. So I think in that sense, we all have to kind of, in terms of the interrelational aspect of worth, right? Is about also sharing our struggles, sharing our vulnerabilities in order, in a sense, to generate a sense of worth. So worth is not about strength as in brute force, but I think it's actually about this idea of, yeah, this idea of we all need each other in a sense. So I tend to be very skeptical of the kind of neoliberal ideas of individualism, this idea of self-reliance. While it is important to know our own worth as individuals, but I think equally it is important to realize that we are created as social beings who are, by the very aspect of being social beings, are interdependent. So interdependence is not necessarily a weakness. It's actually something that we must, I think, view as something positive in our communities. So for me, as an African, this idea of Ubuntu, or Hunu, is quite central in terms of, for me, that is my philosophy of what identity is all about. It comes from communalism. It comes from interdependence. And not viewing that as weakness in ways that sometimes we can be, we can tend to do.